The sun beat down on the dusty main street of Redemption, Arizona, a town barely a dot on the map, but for its single imposing saloon and a cluster of weathered wooden buildings. Ilara stood by the window of her small, cramped room, the heat making the air shimmer outside. Her reflection in the grimy glass showed a young woman with tired, resolute eyes and a face that had known more hardship than happiness. Today, however, a new kind of despair settled over her. "Ilara, are you ready?" A gruff voice called from the hallway. It was her stepfather, Silas. His voice was a familiar blend of command and disinterest. Ilara turned, her simple, dark dress feeling like a shroud. She was 16, and her life, once filled with the quiet hope of one day escaping Silas's control, was about to be sealed in a fate worse than any she had imagined. The door creaked open, and Silas's towering frame filled the doorway. He was a man made of sinew and greed, with a perpetually sour expression. "The lawyer is waiting, don't dawdle." "Silas, please," Ilara began, her voice barely a whisper. "Must I do this?" A sneer twisted his lips. "Do you want to eat, girl? Do you want to keep a roof over your head? This is your duty. You're marrying a wealthy man. You should be grateful." Ilara knew the truth. Silas had squandered what little her mother had left her. The ranch was gone, their small inheritance vanished into the bottom of a whiskey bottle and the pockets of card players. The only thing left of value was Ilara herself, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder, and the highest bidder in this case was a man she had never met, a man named Jeremiah Cade. The story was whispered in town. Jeremiah Cade, a man known for his vast land and stubborn independence, had been thrown from his horse 2 months ago. The fall had been brutal, and he had been in a coma ever since. The doctors held little hope. Silas had found his opportunity. He'd learned of a clause in Cade's will. If he were to die unmarried, his ranch would go to his distant, estranged relatives. But if he were to die married, his wealth would pass to his widow. Silas, with a conniving mind and a lawyer in his pocket, had brokered a deal. He would marry Ilara off to the comatose man, and in exchange for a handsome sum, Cade's lawyer would look the other way. Ilara had begged, pleaded, and cried, but Silas was unmoved. Today was the day of the wedding, a simple grim ceremony in Cade's own bedroom. The room was bathed in the soft light of a single lantern. The air was thick with the smell of medicine and dust. Jeremiah Cade lay motionless in a large bed, his face pale and still. He was a man in his late 20s, with rugged features softened by his unconscious state. A man who was supposed to be her husband. Silas pushed her forward. A man with a pinched face and wire-rimmed glasses, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The vows were a mockery. Ilara repeated them in a daze, her eyes fixed on the man in the bed. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture forced by Silas. His skin was warm, a small spark of life in a body that seemed so close to death. The feel of his arm sent an unexpected tremor through her. The ceremony ended as quickly as it began. The lawyer handed her a certificate. "You are now Mrs. Ilara Cade," he said, his voice businesslike. Silas took her arm. "The agreement is a weekly allowance and a lump sum when he's gone. You will stay here and see to his needs. The ranch hands will see to the rest." He gave her a cruel smile. "Don't try to run. Where would you go? This is your home now." He left, the door closing with a final echoing thud. Ilara was alone with the man who was now her husband, a stranger on the brink of death. The weight of her new reality settled on her shoulders. She walked to the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red. For her, however, the world was nothing but a somber, endless grey. She was Mrs. Ilara Cade, a title she had not wanted, a life she had not chosen. And her husband was a ghost, a presence that was, and yet was not. She was trapped, A pawn in a game of greed. She had to survive. She had to find a way out or a way through. The first few weeks were a blur of loneliness and new responsibilities. The Cade Ranch was a sprawling, well-kept estate, a testament to Jeremiah's hard work. The house, however, felt like a tomb. The only sounds were the soft creak of the floorboards, the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, and the labored breaths of her husband. The ranch hands, a gruff but decent lot, were polite but distant. They saw her as an interloper, a young woman who had swooped in to claim what wasn't hers. The cook, a stern woman named Martha, was the only person who spoke to her with any semblance of kindness. "He needs tending," Martha said one afternoon, her voice rough but her eyes kind. "Feed him broth, change his sheets, keep him clean. It's a thankless job, child, but it's what a wife does." Ilara threw herself into the work. She had little else to do. She would sit by Jeremiah's bedside for hours, meticulously cleaning his face, massaging his hands and feet to keep his circulation going, and talking to him. At first her words were simple, mechanical. "It's a beautiful day, Mr. Cade. The sky is blue today." But as the days turned into weeks, the silence of the room became a kind of companion. She started talking about herself, her mother, who had died 2 years ago, the small garden they used to tend, the stories she used to read. She spoke of her fear, her loneliness, and her desperation. She didn't expect an answer, but the act of speaking, of sharing her burden, was a release. One evening, a storm rolled in, the wind rattling the windows. The lantern flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Ilara, restless, sat by Jeremiah's bed. "It's a nasty storm, Mr. Cade," she said, her voice soft. "I hope you can't hear the thunder." She took his hand. His fingers were long and calloused, a working man's hand. She noticed a faint scar on his knuckle, a small detail that made him seem more real, less of a ghost. She ran her thumb over the scar. "What happened here?" she murmured. "Did you get it as a boy, climbing trees, or from a fight?" She paused, a thought striking her. The man who had been her husband for over a month was nothing more than a name and a still body. She knew nothing about him. She didn't know if he liked coffee or tea, if he was a good man or a cruel one, what made him laugh or what made him angry. She found a small journal on his nightstand, tucked under a book. She hesitated, but her curiosity won out. The entries were sparse, but they painted a picture of a solitary man, a man who loved his land and his horses more than people. He wrote about the struggle to make the ranch prosperous, the satisfaction of a hard day's work, and the loneliness of his life. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. This man, who was a stranger to her, was not just a symbol of her misery. He was a human being, with a history and a soul. Her anger at Silas for forcing her into this situation had been a simple, clear emotion. But now, a new, more complicated feeling was beginning to bloom. It was not love, not yet. It was something akin to empathy, a growing sense of shared humanity. The man in the bed was not just Jeremiah Cade, her husband. He was a person, just as she was. And in the silent house, in the middle of a storm, their two separate worlds were starting to intertwine. Weeks turned into a month, and then another. Ilara's routine solidified. She woke with the sun, tending to Jeremiah before the ranch hands stirred. She learned to make a decent stew, to mend clothes, and to keep the house in order. But her primary focus remained on the man in the bed. She would read to him from the books she found in his study, classic tales of adventure and history. She would describe the world outside, the vibrant colors of the sunsets, the feel of the wind on her face, the sound of the horses in the corral. One morning, as she was wiping his brow with a cool cloth, she noticed it. His hand, which she was holding, twitched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Jeremiah?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you just move?" She waited, Her breath held. Nothing. She squeezed his hand gently. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand back." Seconds stretched into a minute, and then a faint, almost non-existent pressure. He squeezed her hand. Ilara gasped, tears of shock and relief spilling down her cheeks. She ran to the hallway, shouting for Martha. "He moved! He squeezed my hand!" Martha, ever the stoic, hurried into the room. "Child, are you sure?" Ilara pointed at Jeremiah's hand, still clasped in hers. Martha leaned over, her face a mask of concern. She called for the doctor, a stern man who had visited several times before, only to shake his head and give grim predictions. The doctor arrived, examining Jeremiah with a critical eye. He checked his pulse, shone a small light into his eyes, and observed his breathing. He stood up, his face impassive. "It's a flicker of a sign. It doesn't mean much. His body is still fighting, but it's a sign." He left, but his words, "a sign," echoed in Ilara's mind. It was a victory, a small one, but it was something. It was proof that he was fighting, that he was still there. And with that small sign, something shifted in Ilara. Her care for him was no longer a chore. It was a mission. She began to spend even more time with him, talking to him constantly, telling him stories of the ranch hands, of the beautiful, unforgiving land they called home. She talked about the way the light hit the mountains at dawn, the smell of the sagebrush after a rain, the sound of the coyotes at night. She was painting a picture for him, trying to lure him back to the world. And he responded. The twitches became more frequent. His eyelids would flutter, the rhythmic breathing would occasionally hitch. It was slow, agonizing progress, but it was progress nonetheless. The ranch hands, who had been so standoffish, noticed the change in her. They saw her dedication, her unwavering care, and they began to treat her with a new respect. She was no longer just the young woman who had married a ghost. She was the one who was bringing him back. Word of Jeremiah's slow but steady recovery reached the town. Silas, who had been expecting a quick inheritance, was furious. He rode out to the ranch one afternoon, his face flushed with anger. He burst into Jeremiah's room, a storm of fury and greed. Ilara was sitting by the bed, reading to her husband. "What is this nonsense I hear? He's getting better?" "He is," Ilara said, her voice calm but firm. "He's fighting." "Nonsense!" Silas snarled. He looked at Jeremiah's still form with contempt. "He's a ghost. He should have died by now. You're supposed to be mourning, not playing nursemaid." He turned to her, his eyes narrowed. "The lawyer says the agreement is null and void if he recovers. The deal was contingent on his death. You're not getting a dime, and I'm not getting my money. This is your fault." Ilara stood up, her small frame radiating a new kind of strength. "This is not my fault, Silas. This is a miracle. And if he recovers, you can take your agreement and burn it. I don't want your money. I want my freedom." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Freedom? You're tied to him now, girl. You're his wife. For richer or for poorer, remember? And I'm not leaving empty-handed." He demanded the deed to the ranch, claiming Jeremiah owed him money for services rendered. Ilara, now no longer a frightened girl but a determined woman, refused. "This is not yours to take. This ranch belongs to Jeremiah, and it will remain so." Silas's eyes blazed with a dangerous fire. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "You think you're so brave now? Wait until he wakes up and finds out who you are. He'll kick you out and you'll be left with nothing. I'm giving you a chance. Sign this over and you can come with me. We'll leave this godforsaken place and find something new." "No," Ilara said, her voice shaking but her resolve firm. She pulled away from him. "I won't. And I will not let you take this." Silas, seeing he could not intimidate her, changed tactics. He would wait. He would keep an eye on her. He would make sure she didn't interfere. He would get his money one way or another. He stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of menace in his wake. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. Silas was a real threat now. He wasn't just a ghost of her past. He was a greedy man who would do anything to get what he wanted. She looked at Jeremiah, lying still and silent, a vulnerable symbol of her new life. She had to protect him. She had to protect the ranch. She had to find a way to fight back. Days turned into a week, a tense, watchful period. Ilara was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. She feared Silas would return with more men, that he would try to seize the ranch by force. She spoke to the ranch hands, a man named Jesse, an older, grizzled cowboy who had been with Jeremiah for years. "Silas is a dangerous man, Jesse," she said, her voice low. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Jesse, a man of few words, looked at her with a new respect in his eyes. "We'll keep an eye out, ma'am. This is Mr. Cade's ranch. It's our home. We won't let that snake take it." Their support was a balm to her soul. She was not alone. She had allies now, people who saw her not as an opportunist, but as the protector of the man they all respected. The doctor's visit was her only solace. He confirmed the progress. Jeremiah's vital signs were stronger. His breathing was more regular. He was responding to stimuli, his body slowly but surely healing itself. One afternoon, as she was sitting by his bed, holding his hand and reading to him, something happened that she had only dreamed of. His eyes, for so long closed and unresponsive, fluttered open. They were a startlingly clear blue, a shade she had only seen in the sky after a storm. They were unfocused at first, but then they slowly, agonizingly settled on her face. Ilara's breath hitched. "Jeremiah," she whispered. His lips moved, a faint, raspy sound. "Water," he croaked. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. She rushed to the pitcher, pouring a glass of water, and held it to his lips. He took a long, slow drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're awake," she said, the words a joyous sob. He swallowed. "Who are you?" The words were a bucket of cold water. He didn't remember. He didn't know who she was. The past months of care, the small victories, the bond that had formed in the silence of the room, it was all one-sided. He was a stranger again. "I'm Ilara," she said, her voice trembling. I'm your wife." His brow furrowed in confusion, his eyes filled with a mix of shock and disbelief. He tried to sit up, but his body was weak. He sank back against the pillows, his gaze on her, an expression of utter disbelief on his face. "My wife? It's a long story," she said, wiping her tears. "But you're safe. You're home. The ranch hands, they're waiting for you." The doctor arrived soon after, examining him, a rare smile on his face. "A miracle, Mr. Cade, a true miracle." Jeremiah, however, was silent. He looked at Ilara, then at the doctor, then at the room. He was a man waking from a long, strange dream, a dream he could not remember. He was awake, but he was lost. And Ilara, who had brought him back to life, was now faced with her biggest challenge yet, telling him the truth. Jeremiah's recovery was slow and frustrating. He was weak, his mind foggy, and his memory was fractured. He could recall the names of his ranch hands, the layout of the ranch, and his old life. But the last 3 months were a blank, and at the center of this blank was Ilara, a woman he was told was his wife. "Are you certain?" he asked the doctor, his voice still weak. The doctor nodded. "The legal documents are all in order, Mr. Cade. You were married while you were indisposed, to protect your estate." Jeremiah's eyes, filled with distrust, fixed on Ilara. She told him the story, leaving out no detail. She explained Silas, the forced marriage, the deal he had made. She told him about the ranch, the way she had tended to him, the way she had fought to protect his property. He listened, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he was silent for a long time. "And you expect me to believe this?" he asked, his voice cold. "I have no reason to lie," she said. her heart aching. "I came here to survive, but I stayed because you were not just a way out. You were a person, and I knew you deserved to be home on your own land." He looked at her, searching her eyes for any hint of deceit. He saw only exhaustion and sincerity. He saw the truth. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "When Silas came back, when you knew I was recovering, you could have run." "Where would I go?" she said, a sad smile on her lips. "I had nothing. This place became my home. And you became my responsibility." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling over him. He had woken up to a new reality, a life he had not chosen, a wife he did not know. The man who had been so proud of his independence was now beholden to a woman he had never met. The irony was not lost on him. He was a rancher, a man of the land. He was used to dealing with the harsh realities of life and death. But this was a different kind of challenge. This was a challenge of the heart. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Jeremiah, regaining his strength, was a man of quiet contemplation. He observed Ilara from a distance, watching her interact with the ranch hands, listening to her talk about the daily happenings of the ranch. He saw the respect in their eyes, the way they deferred to her. He saw her competence, her strength, her quiet dignity. They began to talk, slowly, tentatively. He asked her about her life, about her mother, about her dreams. She, in turn, told him about his ranch, the small improvements she had made, the way she had managed the supplies and the hands. One evening they sat on the porch watching the sun set. The air was cool and crisp, the sky a riot of purple and gold. "I found your journal," she said, her voice soft. He stiffened. "Did you read it?" "Yes," she said, not apologizing. I wanted to know who you were." He was silent for a moment. "And what did you find?" "A lonely man," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "A man who loved his land more than people. I understood that. The land gives you a kind of peace that people can't." He looked at her, a new kind of respect in his eyes. He had never met anyone who understood the quiet communion between a man and his land. He was used to women who wanted the city, the parties, the life of comfort. Ilara was different. She had a kind of deep-rooted understanding of the land, of the quiet strength that came from it. "Why did you read to me?" he asked. "Why did you talk to me?" "Because," she said, turning to look at him, "you were lonely. Even in your sleep you were lonely. I couldn't stand it, and I wanted you to know that someone was there." He looked at her, a strange new emotion in his chest. Gratitude, admiration, maybe something more. A fragile truce had been established, a tentative beginning of a new kind of relationship, one built on a foundation of shared loneliness and quiet understanding. The truce, however, was shattered by the return of Silas. He arrived with two burly men, their faces hard and their eyes full of menace. He strode into the house, a cruel smile on his face. He found Jeremiah sitting by the fire, a book in his hand. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The dead man walks. I trust you've heard the news, Mr. Cade. Your wife is a fraud. The marriage is invalid. She's a thief." Jeremiah stood up, his gaze steady. "Get out of my house, Silas." Silas laughed. "I'm not leaving without my money. Your wife here promised me a sum, and I intend to collect." "She promised you nothing," Jeremiah said, his voice cold. "She was forced into this, and she has done nothing but save my life and protect my home." Silas's smile faltered. He hadn't expected Jeremiah to defend her. "You don't understand, Cade. She's a con artist. She's after your money." "I understand perfectly," Jeremiah said. "I understand a man who would sell a girl for a few dollars. I understand a coward who would take advantage of a dying man. And I understand a man who has now overstayed his welcome." He nodded to the two ranch hands who had emerged from the shadows, their hands on their holsters. Jesse was among them, his eyes narrowed, his expression grim. Silas, seeing he was outnumbered, tried one last gambit. He reached for a pistol. In a flash, Jeremiah moved, his movements surprisingly swift for a man who had been bedridden for months. He grabbed Silas's wrist, twisting it until the man dropped the gun with a yelp of pain. The other two men, seeing the tables turned, backed away slowly. "Get out," Jeremiah said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And if I ever see you near my home or my wife again, I'll bury you myself." Silas, his face pale with rage and fear, scrambled to his horse and rode off, his two men following close behind. The crisis was over. Ilara, who had been watching the scene unfold from the hallway, walked to Jeremiah. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a new kind of admiration. He had not just defended her, he had called her his wife. He looked at her, his expression a mix of relief and something else. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you, Jeremiah." He nodded, the tension leaving his shoulders. He was still a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had fought for her. He had protected her. The confrontation with Silas changed everything. It broke the ice, shattered the fragile truce, and laid the groundwork for a new kind of connection. Jeremiah and Ilara were no longer strangers living in the same house. They were allies, a team. Jeremiah began to take a more active role in the ranch. He was still weak, but with Ilara's help, he slowly regained his strength. She would ride with him, their conversations growing longer and more personal. He told her about his parents, his dreams of making the ranch the most prosperous in the state, the hardships he had faced. She, in turn, told him about her mother's illness, the kindness of a neighbor who taught her to read, and her secret dream of opening a small library in town someday. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Jeremiah looked at her, a soft expression in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "the lawyer told me the marriage, it's not legally binding, because I was in a coma. We could annul it. You could be free." Ilara looked at him, her heart in her throat. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the freedom she had once so desperately wanted. But the word tasted bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know what I want, but I know what I feel. I feel grateful for you, for what you did." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. "I came back to life because of you. My world was black and silent, and you were the voice that brought me back." He paused, a look of profound emotion on his face. "I don't know what the future holds, Ilara, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Tears welled in her eyes. It was not a grand declaration of love. It was something more. It was an honest, vulnerable admission of need. It was the first step toward a true partnership. "I don't want to be free," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to annul the marriage. I want to stay with you." He smiled, a slow, gentle curve of his lips. He leaned in, and for the first time, he kissed her. It was a kiss of gratitude, of shared history, of a future that was not born of convenience or necessity, but of a quiet, unexpected love. 6 months later, the Cade Ranch was a place of vibrant life and newfound hope. The ranch was thriving, a testament to Jeremiah's renewed energy and Ilara's quiet support. Their relationship, which had started as a forced arrangement, had blossomed into a true partnership. They were in town one afternoon getting supplies. They walked hand in hand, a silent but powerful testament to their bond. As they walked past the old, abandoned building, Jeremiah stopped. "What's wrong?" Ilara asked. "This is it," he said, his eyes on the building. "This is where your library will be." Ilara's eyes widened. "My library?" He nodded. "You told me you wanted to open a library. It's a good idea. The children here need books, and it's a good way for us to give back." He looked at her, a look of profound affection on his face. "You gave me my life back, Ilara, and I want to give you yours." He handed her a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a single small silver coin on it. "It's a locket," he said. "Inside is a small picture of the ranch, so you never forget that you have a home and a family." Tears streamed down her face. She had come to this place as a prisoner, a commodity to be sold. She had found a home, a purpose, and a love she had never thought possible. They stood there in the middle of the dusty street, a rancher and his wife, their story a testament to the power of human connection, of resilience, and of the quiet, undeniable strength of the human heart. The world of the Old West was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where miracles could happen, where love could bloom in the most unlikely of places. Ilara and Jeremiah were living proof of it. Their story was not one of magic or fantasy. It was a story of hope, of survival, and of the enduring power of a love forged in the quiet moments of a silent house.